I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, son.
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, welcome back to the Bodybuilding Legends Podcast. I have my good friend Jerry Brainum with me again today, and we are continuing our year-end discussion where we go back 30 years, 40 years, and 50 years, and this will be our last year, Jerry. We've covered 1971, and then we did 1981, so now we're up to 1991. So going 30 years back, we're in the 1990s, which is unbelievable, but time keeps moving forward.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, of course, the 1991 Mr. Olympia today, Jerry, and that was Lee Haney's last Mr. Olympia, so that was an historic event. But there's also a lot of other big contests that took place in 1991, including the NPC Nationals, which Kevin Levrone won, and then we got the 1991 IronMan Pro, which you and I used to both work for IronMan magazine.
Right.
And that was the second year they had that show. And then the 1991 Arnold Classic, which Sean Ray won. And then the 1991 Night of the Champions, which Dorian Yates won.
Right.
But before we get into that, we seem to talk about this every week now on the Bodybuilding Legends Podcast. We always have a couple of bodybuilders pass away. So we had a relatively younger guy, Tom Prince, pass away. And we also had Marvin Eder, who was 90 years old. So let's talk about Tom Prince first, Jerry, because you knew Tom Prince, and
Right.
he was only 52 years old. And I know that he had kidney issues before, and I think he lost his kidney, but he died of cancer, from what I heard.
Right. Well, with Tom, I met Tom. I know that he won the NPC Nationals. I believe it was 97. Do I have that right?
97, yeah, you're right.
But I think I met him before that. I don't know if you have the record. I think if he competed in any nationals before that.
Yeah, he took second in 95, and then he was second in 96.
Okay.
And second in also the USA in 96. I think that was the Craig Titus. I remember that one.
Yeah. So
And
then
then he won the 97 Nationals overall.
okay, so then I met him in 95 because I know he didn't
Okay.
win. When I met him, I interviewed him at the contest, and I found right away he was a very intelligent guy, great build and this and that. And of course, he started training at Gold's Gym. And, as I said, this guy was huge to me. I mean, in the off season, he was like 5'8", and he'd be over 300 pounds. I mean, think about that.
Jeez.
I mean, picture in your mind an average man, 5'8", weighing 300 pounds. They'd be so fat they'd roll down the street. This
Yeah.
guy, all muscle. I mean,
Wow.
I used to comment. I used to say to him, Tom, I looked at his bone structure. He seemed to have like a massive bone structure that, I mean, like I called them dinosaur bones because it could support so much muscle,
Yeah.
And he lifted very heavy. I mean, I saw him do dips with 200 pounds attached to his waist. I've never seen anybody at Gold's Gym use that much weight in dips.
And he had huge legs too, right?
Had huge legs. Everything was heavy, heavy, heavy. And, a couple of years later, he had, as most people know, if they know anything about Tom Prince, he went into kidney failure.
Right.
He had to have a kidney transplant. But before that, I think he had already retired from bodybuilding, even before that happened. But I asked him about that. I asked him, what do you think caused the kidney problems? Because, the bodybuilders, I mean, some of the bodybuilders seem to have kidney problems. I mean, they say that Nasser Al-Somebody died of a kidney problem. Of course, Flex Wheeler has a kidney problem. And so I thought I wanted to see where his kidney problem came from, because a lot of people believe that the bodybuilders get kidney problems or kidney failure because of the heavy steroid use.
Yeah.
And, he didn't deny using steroids. I didn't ask him for his steroid routine. I said, Tom, what do you think caused your kidney failure? What he told me at the time was all that heavy lifting he did. I mean, the man trained heavy all the time. This is the guy who lifted light weights. He said his joints was so sore all the time that he had a habit of taking a lot of tablets of ibuprofen, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. We know it as, what's the common name for that?
Advil?
Advil, yeah, Advil. And he was taking, believe it or not, 12 to 15 tablets a day. What he didn't know, and this is a medical fact, when you take large amounts of that drug, it destroys your kidneys over time. It just destroys them. So at the time I spoke to him, he attributed his kidney failure to he said he did this for like 3 years in a row, taking this massive ibuprofen. But it turns out, I found out later, this is interesting, what happened was he had a kidney transplant. When I ran into him long after he retired at Gold's, he was almost unrecognizable. He was very thin. He used to have these big, broad shoulders. He had little, tiny shoulders. He looked like he weighed maybe 150 at the most.
Yeah,
right?
it was an amazing transformation.
Right. But I said, "How you doing, Tom?" We spoke for a while. I asked him what he was doing. He told me he was into real estate, and he was doing very well. He seemed very happy. I asked him if he trained. He said occasionally, but when I saw him, he wasn't training. He just happened to be in the front of the gym. I don't know why he was there, but it turns out that Tom had the same disease that Flex Wheeler had. It's called focal glomerular something sclerosis. It's basically caused by a buildup of scar tissue in the liver that destroys the kidney filtering units, the nephrons, to the point where you have to have a kidney transplant or you could die. Now, Flex said it was genetic, and so did Tom, because Tom said the original kidneys that he got transplanted failed, and he had to get another kidney transplant.
Oh, man.
And that failed too. And then he realized, it turns out some doctors or nephrologists that knew more about it explained to him that his blood contained well, he didn't know what it was, but I know what it was. It's called immunoglobulin M, and that selectively destroys the kidney. It's an autoimmune effect that destroys, so in other words, he could have kept putting in more kidneys and they would have failing. So, so at the time of his death, he still had the kidney transplant, but it wasn't working. He was in kidney failure. He had to go to dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours at a time. See, but strangely enough, it wasn't the kidney. He didn't die of kidney failure. He died of cancer.
Right.
Or what kind of cancer he had, I don't know. But I'm wondering if maybe, possibly, I don't want to even speculate, but it could have been kidney cancer. But I don't know. I have no idea. But I know he died of kidney, and I know that the last couple of months of his life, unfortunately, he was, certain types of cancer, you get something called cachexia, where your body kind of eats itself away, Fortunately, he was like that. He kind of like had the last couple of months with him, he had it really bad. He more or less, his body ate itself up, and then he died. It's a tragic, because Tom was an intelligent guy. He had a master's degree in English literature, and for a while, when I met him at the Nationals in '95, I think he was living in Florida, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I remember he said he was teaching. And right away that struck a note. I said, wow, a guy like this monster bodybuilder is a teacher. Don't see that very, I mean, Frank Zane was a teacher too,
Right.
And of course, Richard Baldwin, our mutual friend, he was a college professor, but right away it struck me. I admired. He seemed like a Renaissance man. He had the great physique. He spoke well. He was intelligent, We
Yeah.
became friends. And I used to talk to him when I'd go to the gym. Always a friendly, nice guy. And like I said, you had to see this guy in person in the off season to realize he was thick. I mean, he rivaled guys like Paul Dillette. He was huge. He wasn't as tall as Dillette. Dillette was like 6, but I mean, he was just so thick. And I used to look at him and he's always training heavy. I'm thinking, how can he train heavy like that all the time and not have injuries? See, what I didn't know was he did have injuries. I didn't find it till later, because I really think that, he was much younger then, of course, but I really believe you can't train. And Dorian Yates said the same thing. You can't train with super heavy weights all the time and not get an injury. Sooner or later, something to give. I mean, Dorian himself in interviews, he said the reason he retired from bodybuilding competition was not that he was afraid of Ronnie Coleman or anyone else. He had so many injuries that he felt that he couldn't train at 100% effort.
Right.
So if he couldn't come in at 100%, he was done. He was finished. And, and he was loath to say it because, he didn't want to say his training system was bad, meaning high intensity to failure, blah, blah. But, he kind of hinted that, the heavy weights kind of did it. So, that's what happens. I mean, he just, I guess he wanted to be big, Tom, and he felt that heavy weights was, which is a certain amount is true. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
That you lift heavy, usually you get bigger muscles. I mean, although there's a big controversy now in exercise, they're now saying that, and you've seen this too, John. How many bodybuilders have you seen that you see them in the gym? They're huge guys, and you expect them to be lifting really heavy weights, and you train, and they're using these ridiculously light weights for them. I mean, for them. For someone else, it might be moderate weight, but for these huge guys, and yet they're huge. You wonder, but it turns out you can have big muscles and not necessarily have the strength to go with it. In other words, it's not always the same. We've seen a lot of Olympic weightlifters, powerlifters. They hoist really heavy weights, but these guys don't have 22-inch arms.
Right.
17, 16-inch arms.
Yeah.
But in other words, so they don't always go together. But in Tom's case, he felt that lifting heavy weights was the way to go. And I'll tell you, the guy was a great guy. I felt bad when I heard that he died. A really nice guy.
Yeah. He didn't really have much of a pro career. He got third place at the Night of the Champions in 2001.
Right.
I think that was his highest placing.
Let me ask you, John, your opinion. You're a good observer of bodybuilding. I look at the guy. You've seen the photos of him in top shape.
Yeah.
Right? And I noticed too that his pro career was less than stellar, let's say, right?
Yeah.
How do you attribute that? What was wrong with the guy? I mean, I watched after I heard he died. I found a thing on YouTube of him posing at one of the shows. I really couldn't see any weak points. I mean, why?
Yeah, I couldn't either. I know he had really huge legs and he was super thick, and he always got high praise from everybody. So maybe he was never in condition, because I'm looking at some of his placings here.
Yeah.
Like his first Night of the Champions, he got 13th.
Yeah.
And then he got third in 2001. And then the Arnold Classic, he got 11th. The IronMan Pro, he got 9th. The only Olympia he ever did, he got 16th. So yeah, he never did that well.
I think it must be, I think you hit the nail on the head. He probably looked a little soft.
Yeah.
He probably wasn't as ripped as the other guys. He did. And even though he was huge and he obviously wasn't fat, but he wasn't kind of like super defined, shredded.
Yeah.
Like the guy. So they kind of placed him low because he wasn't missing any body parts from what I could see. He had calves, he had thighs, he had gigantic leg. I mean, God, you ever seen
leg biceps? I remember that. Yeah.
Oh God,
everybody always talked about that. Yeah.
He had one of the biggest hamstring development I've ever seen in bodybuilding. I mean,
yeah.
So it wasn't that he lacked muscle. It had to be, as you said, maybe the conditioning wasn't up to par compared because the guy had no weak points.
Right. Yeah.
But it just that's the only reason he could have placed that.
Maybe he could have been a little wider. Maybe
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it seems like though, I just talked about this on one of my social media pages about like Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates and how they both trained so heavy, and for their time they were the biggest in their generation. So it does seem like we're going to talk about Marvin Eder in a second, and he was a groundbreaking bodybuilder for his time. Yeah. But it seems like you really do kind of got to train heavy in order to develop the size, right?
Yeah, well, the way it works, I just actually talked about this just the other day. You take something like training to failure, which is a common population. In other words, when you do a set, you do it to complete failure, right?
Right.
What the current science shows about that is if you want to train light, let's say 30 to 40% of 1 rep max, that's lightweight.
That's very light, yeah.
You got to do like 20 to 30 reps, right? Because you got to build up what they call metabolic stress. And you have to do it to failure each set, because if you don't, you're not going to get the muscle fibers like type 2A, they call, no, I'm sorry, type 2X muscle fibers. Those are the muscle fibers that are most amenable to growth. Now, here's the difference. When you lift heavy weights, you don't have to go to failure. Because the body, the way the body works, it's called the Henneman's recruitment principle. The body recruits only as many muscle fibers as necessary to complete the movement.
Right.
Now, the body can sense when you're lifting heavy weights, so it throws in the whole ball game. In other words, you get all the muscle fibers. You don't have to go to failure. You're automatically. Now think about it. The more muscle fibers you involve, the greater the chance of muscle damage and consequent hypertrophy or growth. So, I kind of don't buy, what I said earlier about some of the scientists saying strength and muscle don't go. From my personal experience, I think you'll agree, I believe there is a definite relationship between strength and muscle. I know that when not anymore, but when I was strong years ago, my muscle size was almost in direct relationship to how much weight I was lifting. Like I once made a bet with a guy, because my legs were always very responsive, my thighs. I said to him, I'll bet you I could put an inch on my thigh in 1 month. He says, no way, because I already had pretty big legs. All I did is change my squat routine around, where I did a combination of heavy weight and high reps. I did heavy weight for like 4 sets, and then I finished off the set. You're not going to believe this. With one set of 225 pounds, I did 50 reps.
Wow.
I did that in every thigh workout.
Damn.
At the end of the month, I had put an inch and a half on my thighs. I knew it, So the point is, to answer your question, I believe that all things being equal, yes. In other words, the stronger you are, and of course, there's a genetic component too. Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates were genetic freaks who would respond very well. There's a lot of guys, like I say, who can still be strong, but not show that kind of development. They can be phenomenally strong, but not show that kind of. You have to have the genetic component too. But generally speaking, I believe there's a direct relationship between strength and muscle size. If you're not going to push the weight at all, you can get, like the science says that you can get the same amount of muscle size doing that system I just told you, 20 to 30 reps to failure. But the truth is, most guys or most people will not go to failure. If you don't go to failure when you're doing that, you're not going to get the gains. Whereas when you lift heavy weights, you don't have to think about it. It's automatic.
That makes sense.
You have no choice. You're not going to be able to finish the set unless you recruit those fibers.
Right.
So if you add it all up, the chances of getting bigger from lifting heavier versus the lightweight to failure is much greater with the heavier weights because it's automatic. And you don't even, like I said, you don't have to go to failure. Now you all you have to do is lift it. You stop.
That makes sense.
I've seen it over and over again.
Because even if you go way back to Reg Park and Bill Pearl, those guys lifted heavy. They were the biggest guys in their generation too.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when we talk about Marvin, we could talk about how he trained with Reg Park. When Reg Park came to New York, they trained together.
That's true.
We might as well slip right into Marvin.
All right.
I'll tell you a quick story about him. I knew who he was, right? He was famous. When I was training back in New York as a teenager at R&J Health Studio, he would occasionally come by there, but he didn't work out. He just stopped by. He would visit Julie Levine, who was the owner of the gym. And one time I saw him, he was a plumber. And I saw him, I was working out in the gym, it's a small gym. People might, if anyone who watches the movie Pumping Iron, the scenes of Louis Ferrigno training with his father, that was R&J Health Studio. That was the gym he was training in. But anyway, he showed up one day, and I remember he walked up to I don't know why, there was an Olympic bar. It had about maybe 295, 300 pounds on there, right? He was in a plumber's uniform, wasn't in workout clothes. I remember he went up to it, he cleaned it, and he pressed it. And when I say pressed it, I don't mean he went like this. It was like this.
Wow.
He if you didn't know better, you'd think there was some fake weight on the bar.
Oh
And
my God.
I was like 15, 16 years old. My jaw dropped because I knew who this guy was. He was preceded by his reputation, like they say.
Yeah.
But when I saw the strength, that raw, and this is a guy who hadn't trained in years.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because see, Marvin Eder got a raw deal because he was an up and coming guy in the early, like around 1950 or so. I think when he was 19, I think it was 49 or something, 40. He got second in a national contest. I don't remember if it was Junior America. I don't remember which one, but he was up and coming. But unfortunately, at that time, WIDA was starting his organization. The IFBB was beginning.
Yeah.
And the AAU had a kind of clash with IFBB and blah, blah. Anyway, to make a long story short, Marvin Eder got caught in the trap. He was innocent victim. I don't know whether he did a posing exhibition or some say it was a posing exhibition for the IFBB where he got $15 he got paid.
Yeah.
Other stories say it was because he competed in the IFBB contest. I'm not sure which one it was, but I know that the AAU kind of like gave him a hard time. I don't know whether they banned him or what.
Yeah.
But his bodybuilding career, he was disgusted by the whole thing and he didn't want to deal with it and he quit bodybuilding.
Yeah. You're exactly right, Joe. I got this book. I'll read it right here. It says, he was inspired by John Grimmick. He began strength training at 15 years old as a member of the East Side Barbell Club in Brooklyn. And then in 1948, he placed second at the IFBB Junior Mr. America. And he won his division at the IFBB Junior North America Weightlifting Championship. And then it said 1950, Marvin captured the IFBB Mr. Eastern America. And in 1951, got third place at the AAU Mr. America. And then in 1952, he was declared a professional athlete by the AAU over a disputed $15 guest appearance. You got it. And he said he was so devastated by that ruling that he quit competitive heavy lifting. This tragedy cost the United States one of its best 98-pound lifters and bodybuilding one of its most inspirational up-and-coming superstars.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. You see, that's the thing. Marvin was not only a great bodybuilder for his time, but he had this phenomenal raw strength. And before, I know some people will say, well, he took steroids. He didn't take steroids. I mean, come on. I saw the guy when he's probably in his maybe 40s, hadn't trained in years, and comes up and lifts 300 pounds like it weighs nothing. This guy was just a natural genetic strength freak.
Yeah.
I mean, he did dips. I mentioned earlier that what was the guy? I forgot his name.
Tom Prince. Yeah.
Tom Prince. I mentioned how I saw him do dips with 200 pounds. Well, I didn't see this, but apparently Marvin Eder actually did dips with 436 pounds in addition to his 200-pound body. I mean, I don't, maybe the body weight was included. I'm not sure, but I know he did dips with 436 pounds.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Nobody has ever duplicated that to my knowledge.
No, that's an incredible amount of weight. That's unbelievable.
Anybody who, you don't even have to work out. Just go to a parallel bar, do dips. Imagine having over 400 pounds of that.
You'd rip your shoulders up.
And at a body weight of about maybe 198, I believe it was.
Right.
He was like one of the first bodybuilders to bench press 500 pounds.
Yeah.
500 pounds, and he's like just under 200 pounds. And when Reg Park, of course, the great Reg Park, who won 4 Mr. Universe titles, he came to New York and they trained together. I believe it might have been at Abe Goldberg's gym in New York. I'm not sure which gym it was, but they trained together. And Reg and Marvin had a good relationship because, Reg was also prodigiously strong. He was something like the third bodybuilder or third man in the world to bench press 500 also.
He was third, yeah.
And the way they did it, John, it was they let's say I'm doing a bench press. I take it off here. I go down like this, right? Touch the chest and hold it for a second, then press it up. There was no bouncing or special suits with like a rubber suit where you bounce. This was pure raw strength. So Reg was like second or third bodybuilder to do 500, and Marvin Eder was basically the only guy who could keep up with him. Because Reg was another guy that loved to train heavy. His favorite routine for size was what he called the 5-5-5-5.
Right.
5 sets of 5 reps. He liked to lift very heavy. That's how he built the size. And Marvin was the only guy who could, these guys would be doing like 70-pound curls. Marvin Eder, another phenomenal lift, he was able to do side laterals with 120 pounds in each.
Holy cow. Especially during that time. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, I thought I was strong when I was doing the high intensity system around 1970, 71. I built up to where I was able to do 60 pounds strict side lateral.
Yeah.
I thought that was phenomenal. I said, 60, who can do side laterals with 60 pounds?
Right.
He did twice as much. I wasn't on drugs, but that's not the point. The point is I weighed like 225. He weighed 198. He's using much more weight than.
Yeah.
Guy was just phenomenally strong. Absolutely. I mean,
it says here at a height of 5 feet 8 inches, weighing under 200 pounds, Eder became the third person to officially bench press 500 pounds.
Right.
It was not until the steroid era began that anyone of Eder's body weight bench pressed that amount. In 1953, at a weight of 198 pounds, Marvin unofficially clean and pressed 355 pounds, a weight above the world record. He also accomplished a parallel bar dip of 435 pounds. You're right, Jared. Yeah. While weighing 198 pounds of feet, which has never been equal.
Nobody's equaled that. I don't know if anyone ever will. The guy was just an absolute. It makes me think, John. I mean, this is a guy who I totally believe. I mean, he in interviews. I mean, I saw the guy in person a couple, but I never really spoke to him. But in interviews, he's shown, like Reg Park and others of his era, Reg Park, Steve Reeves, they were dead set against steroids. They would discuss the way the bodybuilding had progressed to the point where the guys used huge amounts of anabolic drug. But I can't help wondering what would happen if a guy, Marvin Eder, had used.
I know.
I mean, he had this amount of strength naturally. What if he took he said, I mean, my God, he either would have tore the muscles off the bones. I mean, seriously, this guy was, it's mind-boggling to think about it, Yeah. So Artie Zeller, the famous photographer, Artie Zeller, who was, a lot of people don't know this, but Artie Zeller was a bodybuilder himself, and he trained with Marvin Eder at the Abe Goldberg gym in the early 50s. Artie used to tell me a lot of stories about Marvin Eder. Unfortunately, I don't remember a lot of them. But I remember Artie telling me about a guy at the gym who used to the picture of it still makes me laugh. This guy would carry a sandwich in his wallet. He would keep a sandwich. I don't know if it was Marvin Eder or somebody else. I can't remember. But somebody in that gym would always carry a sandwich in his wallet. I know that's what Artie told me. But Artie told me. Artie used to tell me about some of the strength feats of Marvin, and so they were true. He was an eyewitness. So.
It says Reg Park said of Marvin, we had a lot in common. We were more strength athletes than bodybuilders. We had great workouts at Abe Goldberg's gym in New York. We used 120-pound dumbbells for seated presses and did barbell rows with 400 pounds.
Right.
He said, Eder remarked, Reg Park was one of the few able to keep up with him during a workout.
Yes,
we're squatting 475 pounds for sets of 8 reps and 520 pounds for triples.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many bodybuilders today that can even come close to those.
I know. And then like you said, he was talking about the drugs. He said, health was never divorced from my training. I've never, under any circumstances, considered the use of artificial drugs to stimulate my muscle growth. What's going on now is a nightmare, an obscenity. In a way, I hope the whole thing disappears, but it's getting worse with time. I will not lend my presence to any show, even if they were to honor me. That's in the past. I don't care what present bodybuilders' goals are. You want to get muscular and strong, work out hard, and look after yourself like I did. Still, you can't beat genetics. Can everyone be an Einstein? No, they can't.
Right. Well, that kind of reminds me of what Reg told me, Reg Park. He told me that, he was like a life bodybuilder, but he told me he didn't like going to bodybuilding contests. The only one that he attended in his later years was the Arnold contest, because Arnold was kind of his protege.
Yeah.
So he did that as a favor. But the thing is, I asked him why, Reg. He says, I can't stand the look of these guys.
Yeah.
The bloated bellies. He says, There's no aesthetics anymore.
Right.
There's no symmetry. It says, it just turns my stomach. I can't look at it.
Yeah, they came from such a different era.
Yeah, I mean, in those days, you look at the old photos, look at pictures of Marvin Eder. I mean, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he had a nice aesthetic physique. He had great abs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had most of the body parts together. He wasn't overly huge, but there was nothing really artificial looking about the guy. They didn't have bloated belly, nothing like that.
Right.
I mean, and the truth of the matter is, you look at, unfortunately, Reg sadly died of cancer prematurely. He could have probably lived a lot longer.
Yeah.
But I mean, Marvin made it to 90. And the thing is that I wonder if, the guys today with the drug use today, are they going to make it to 90?
No way.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think there's a price to be paid.
Yeah, there's got to be, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I read the medical journals related to a lot of, the steroid use. Each year, they're finding more and more things that happen when you take steroids long term that they didn't know years ago.
Yeah.
Such as this calcium buildup in the coronary arteries, changes in the structure of the heart, precancerous changes.
Yeah.
Like I think I might have mentioned to you about the trenbolone, how it can cause changes in the brain.
Right.
Like stuff for Alzheimer's disease. I mean, it's going to catch up with these guys. I don't want it to happen, but I don't want to mention any names, but some of these guys that are competing in the Olympia today, some of these really big guys, to me, it's like dead man walking when I look at them.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, there's one young guy, I don't know the man personally. I don't want to embarrass him, but when I look at him, it kind of creeps me out. He's huge. He's got more size than I could ever dream of. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But what is he doing to get that size? I mean, I know he works out hard, but
yeah,
I mean, he stays big all the time. I mean,
and he's bigger than ever, and he keeps getting bigger and bigger.
I mean, I know in his head, he just fired one of his trainers.
Coach, yeah.
Coach, yeah. There's rumors are that maybe the coach didn't like his PED program. I don't know what. We don't really know what the reason was, but the point is that in these guys' minds, the goal is to get bigger and bigger and bigger to win the contest.
Yeah.
But it's like blowing up a balloon, you keep blowing it up, the balloon gets bigger and bigger. Then what happens? It blows up.
Yeah. Well, he said his goal is to win the Olympia 10 times.
Well, hey, more power to him if he does.
But he'll never last that long.
He'll never last that long because as you and I have discussed many times, John, one of the keys to winning the Olympia, year after year, is you have to show some improvement.
Yeah.
Or at least at the very minimum, you have to reach at least the same peak condition you did the year before. If you backslide, you're going to lose.
You're going to lose, yeah.
And this is what happened to Samir Benoud, Chris Dickens, a couple other guys. They just didn't get that.
Even Phil Heath, eventually.
Phil Heath, a good example.
Yeah.
They, and the pressure on your body is just so much. I mean,
well, that's the other thing, when we just did a tribute about Chris Dickerson, and I had Boyer Coe on, and one of the things I was saying to Boyer Coe was, I go, it's amazing when you look at your career, Boyer, because him and Chris were competing for 30 years. They started competing in the 60s and they went all the way up to the 90s. These guys today will never last 30 years.
I don't think so.
Their body can't handle, it doesn't respond to the drugs anymore, because they're taking so many drugs.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I've seen that happen with relatively conservative drug programs. I've seen famous bodybuilders. I'll give you a name. The guy's retired, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind. Do you remember a guy named Phil Hill, I believe his name was?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Huge black guy. I mean, massive guy. He came up to me. I was covering the Night of the Champions for Weider one year in New York. This would be the 90s. And he kind of disappeared from the bodybuilding. He came on like a thunderstorm.
Yeah, it didn't last long.
I mean, this guy was you look at photos. Anyone watching this, Google this guy and look at the photos. He was tremendous, huge legs. He just disappeared.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in a restaurant. Who walks up to me? I had interviewed him when he was competing, so he knew who I was. He comes up to me. He says, "Jerry, you mind if we talk for?" I said, "Sure, sit down, Phil." And we started talking. And I said, "What happened to you, man?" I said, "You were going strong. I thought you were going to be like Mr. Olympia. I had you as one of the top guys." He says, "Between me and you, Jerry, off the record," he says, "my body didn't respond to drugs. Nothing happened."
Yeah.
just, I don't know what happened. I was taking the drugs as I always did, and it just didn't work after a while. I don't know why. It just didn't work. And I had to drop out because I just didn't feel I was in top shape. That's what he told me. I never forgot.
That was over 30 years ago.
That was
what they're doing now.
Yeah, that was, and he was on like probably a conservative program.
Yeah.
And I've heard the same story from guys going right back to the 70s when the steroid programs that Arnold and his contemporaries, that was candy compared to what they do.
Yeah.
Still, after a while, it didn't work as well. See?
Yeah.
That's what Frank Zane in interviews today, he often talks about how he never relied on steroids.
Yeah.
In other words, Frank, what he's saying is he's not denying using steroids. He's saying he used a minimal amount.
Right.
He never depended on them, But see, after then, Frank wasn't trying to be big anyway. He was trying to be perfected, defined. In other words, so it was easy for him. He didn't have to take a lot of stuff because that was not his goal.
Right.
He himself said that once he got over 200 pounds, his kind of strengths disappeared. He just started to look smooth, and he wasn't a big guy. Unless he was cut and ripped, he was not a winning physique. He had really hard shape, so he took a minimal amount of steroids. But the point is that he never relied on them. See, whereas the difference is today, I believe there's a much greater reliance on the drugs than we had back then. In other words, today, drugs are a big part of these guys' preparation and bodybuilding program.
Oh yeah. That's why it's a slippery slope, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know when it's going to change, but it just keeps getting worse. We talk about the 80s and 90s. We're talking mostly about anabolic steroid use. We're not talking about growth hormones. We're not talking about insulin, and who knows what effects that's going to have on the body, right?
That's true.
It's relatively new where we don't know what the effects are going to be.
Insulin really didn't come into bodybuilding until the early to mid 90s.
90s, yeah.
And the only insulin use before that I know of was Tim Belknap, but he was the type 1 guy. He didn't use it for bodybuilding. He used it to stay alive.
Right.
He used it as an anabolic drug. But after and of course, Dorian Yates says in interviews that he felt his use of insulin was a big mistake because it kind of tended to simulate fat and made him smooth.
Yeah.
He didn't see any benefit from it. And if you look at the attributes of insulin, what it does, it's a fat storing hormone.
Yeah.
So it's a slippery slope. I mean, if you don't, I know there's certain people, some of these guys are friends of mine. I don't want to embarrass, but there's certain people that are coaches today that advocate fairly huge amounts of insulin. Mm-hmm. And like I say, it can go wrong real easy with insulin.
Yeah.
It's extremely fat stimulating insulin, extremely fat stimulating. It is the most fat stimulating hormone in the body.
Yeah.
It causes your body to store fat.
But it can also be anabolic if you take it right.
It can be anabolic, especially when combined with like growth hormone.
Yeah.
And also insulin is only anabolic in the presence of large amounts of amino acids. Without a large amount of amino acids, insulin is what they call anti-catabolic. Mm-hmm. It helps to prevent the breakdown of muscle. That's true. So, if you look at it from bodybuilding perspective, the main advantage of insulin would not be to put size on, but it'd be two reasons: to counter the effects of growth hormone. Growth hormone stimulates elevated blood glucose. Insulin lowers it, so insulin would counter the side effect of growth hormone. The secondary effect is that insulin, it really will help you maintain muscle under dieting conditions. It will.
Right.
But again, you got that problem where you just step over the line a little bit. It can make you smooth because it also stimulates a adrenal steroid hormone called aldosterone, which helps your body to retain salt and water. So it's a real fine line there,
Yeah.
I agree with Dorian. I think most bodybuilders should keep away from insulin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one other thing, it does stimulate. It stimulates glycogen synthesis in the muscle.
Yeah,
so
that's what I mean. Yeah,
will make the muscle look thick. You have a thicker look. It does do that too.
Right,
yeah.
Right. I'll tell you, I don't know if I ever told you a story about Dorian Yates. Now, I started bodybuilding in '77, so I had been in bodybuilding for almost 20 years. But I saw him guest pose in 1994 in Chicago. They had the Junior Mr. USA contest in Chicago, and Dorian was guest posing. Now, Dorian had won the Olympia twice, in '92 and '93. So he was guest posing. I remember the show was in May, And everybody was talking about, you got to see this guy in the off season. He's like over 300 pounds. He's unbelievable. You know, I remember J.M. Mannion was telling me a story. He went to pick him up at the airport. And he had a Jeep, and he said he was so thick, the seatbelt wouldn't even fit around him in the Jeep. You know, he was like this thick. You know. Yeah. So, anyways, he comes out and he poses, and he was so big, and I don't mean muscularly big. Now, I had seen Sergio guest pose before, so I saw one of the best, you know, and I had seen big bodybuilders pose before. I'd been to Olympia and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I never saw a physique like Dorian. It was almost disgusting. It was almost like I remember even his bones were big, his knees were big, and his calves were so big, and my jaw hit the floor. But it wasn't like, remember how you used to talk about Arnold in '74, how he looked like a Greek god. Right. Dorian didn't look like a Greek god. I mean, no disrespect to Dorian. I really admire him. And I've interviewed him before, and I think he's a great interview and everything, but he just looked disgusting. It looked over the line. It looked like too much.
Like almost like a caricature, right?
Yeah, it didn't look human. It was the first bodybuilder I saw, and this is the early 90s. So now, you know, of course, many bodybuilders came after that. I mean, this was the start of it, right? Yeah. But I remember I was just so freaked out. It didn't look right. It didn't look human. And I remember they had an intermission right after he guest posed. And I went out into the lobby and I was talking to all these bodybuilder friends that I knew from Chicago, guys who worked out in other gyms, competitors and stuff. And everybody had the same opinion. They were like, that was too much. It was too much. It was like freaky. It was, but not freaky in a good way.
Right.
It was like, I had seen Tim Belknap and I thought that was freaky, but it was like impressive.
Yeah.
To me, Dorian it was too much. And I remember saying to somebody, I said, well, that must be what happens when you combine high amounts of growth hormone with steroids.
Right. Yeah, that's about right.
That was like, to me, that was the first time I'd seen that. Now I saw Lee Haney pose before. He didn't look like that. Yeah. I mean, it was like another level. It was a different type of person.
Did you ever see, I didn't see this in person, photos of Ronnie Coleman posing in the off season? What he looked like?
I saw him pose too in the off season. Yeah.
He claimed to weigh 330 pounds.
Yeah.
And when I saw him, I just couldn't believe my eyes.
Right.
His stomach was immense.
Right.
And it came out like, you know, but you could see the guy he still had the, you know, you clearly see the delts and the arm.
Yeah.
He was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, his legs looked like 45-inch thighs.
I know. Well, that was when I first saw him. I had seen pictures of him in the Olympia, so I knew he had the big back and the big arms, and I was expecting to see that. I could not believe the legs. He's 5'11". He looked like he was 5'2" on stage because his legs were so enormous.
Yeah.
I had never seen legs like that before. It was unbelievable.
But can you imagine if Ronnie Coleman was guest posing at a contest, and before the contest started, they opened with the guest poser, which was Ronnie Coleman. And let's say you brought a friend or a woman or something, and who'd never seen a bodybuilding contest.
Right.
And she sits there and the curtain opens. There's Ronnie Coleman with the big stomach.
Right.
And she turns to you and says, John, is this what a bodybuilder is?
I know.
How do you explain? It reminds me of the time I was at a contest years ago. I was sitting in the audience next to a guy who was there with his wife, I think it was. And the guy posing, we were close enough where we could see the guy turns to the back. He does a back shot. He's got severe cystic acne all over his back, right? It looks like a map of the stars, you know what I mean? All over.
Yeah.
Big, you know, zits all over his back. So she turns to me, she says, is that normal, Jerry, in bodybuilding for those, you know, whatever that is, those red things on his back? I said, no. I said, that usually indicates heavy steroid use. I said, that is not normal at all. You know what I mean? She didn't know. I mean, she thought maybe it went along with when you get big muscles, you get zits all over your back.
Right. But I think when the physique started getting like that, that's when we lost it. That's when it went too far, you know.
It is. I mean, is there anyone today, John? I know there's a little tangential to what we're going to talk about, but is there any pro bodybuilder, let's talk about the Olympia, that you think comes the closest to having, let's say, a throwback physique or a physique that, you know, they could say that would be more attractive to most people, even bodybuilders? Is there anyone you could think of?
Well, like I said, I thought Sean Roden kind of looked like that. And
Sean was like that. He was.
yeah, because he had that small, tight waist,
Yeah.
And I always liked Cedric McMillan's physique, although I think that was the physique of years ago. I don't think we're going to see his physique being at the top anymore. I think he's kind of past his prime,
Yeah, I agree though with both guys, but I mean, I can't think of any. That's why I asked you. I can't think of any guys that don't look kind of blown up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're all like that. Yeah, they're all like
that. And it concerns me because I don't want to see anyone get sick. But when I look at that, I can't help thinking, what are these guys doing to get that look?
Oh, the other one that looks good, I thought, is that Patrick Moore. Did you ever see Patrick Moore?
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah. Now, I remember seeing him at the Olympia a couple years ago. And, in the beginning, they all come out at the show and they do their posing. They do like kind of like the mandatory poses. They get like a minute on stage or something.
Yeah.
And when he came out, I didn't know it was his first Olympia. Mm-hmm. And I remember the audience really gave him a good reception. And they were like, because he was really ripped. He had great abs. He had a lot of detail in his back. And everybody, like, he got one of the best receptions of anybody in the show.
But he didn't.
But then when they went to compare to everybody else, he was just not big enough. Right. But I thought, if you're looking at a physique, he had one of the best physiques. Yeah. But he knows the challenge for him is he's got to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Otherwise, he can't compete with these guys.
Yeah, I don't know that guy personally, but I not long ago I read where he's trying to put on a lot of size now. Exactly like you said. He feels it's the only way he can compete, which is sad.
It is sad.
It's going to wind up ruining the beauty of his physique. It's going to he's going to look bloated like the rest of the guys.
So the days of like Samir and Frank Zane, and they're gone. Those guys could never compete in the open anymore.
No, the only thing we can have that's coming closest to in comparison would be the classic bodybuilding. Yeah. Those guys are limited, I guess, in how big they can get. So, they come closest to let's say the bodybuilders of the 70s and 60s and all that. But the pro division, forget it. It's never going to go back to.
No. And Patrick Moore, I think, was thinking about doing the classic, but we would have to lose way too much weight. He'd have to lose like over 30 pounds.
Yeah. He's kind of in a limbo area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Too big for the classic, too small for the pro. It's sad. Guys, I agree with you. I was impressed too. In fact, I think I did a review of that. I did a video for I can't remember, but I did a video and I singled him out.
Yeah,
because he didn't do that well. I said this guy is tremendous. I said this guy is going to be a top pro. I said he's got all the tools, but
nothing.
Yeah.
They have to put on so much size. It's just that's just the way of the world now. That's just the way of the bodybuilding world,
And you do pay a price. If these guys think they're not going to pay a price,
I know,
using massive amounts of drugs, they're in dreamland. I don't care what their coaches say.
Yeah,
they're going to be messed up. But what can I say? Everybody has to choose their own.
I think what happened with that guy you're talking about, his coach didn't want him to do the Arnold because he said he needed a break, and he wants to do it because he wants to win the money.
Okay.
But he's been competing for like a year and a half straight. I think he's done like 6 shows, and his coach said you need to take a break, and he doesn't want to take a break.
Yeah, well, you want to know something? The coach was giving him good advice.
Yeah.
That guy is only about 27 years old or something.
26, I think. Yeah.
He's a young guy, and he probably, when you're in your 20s, if you think back, everybody has this.
I think you're invincible, right?
Nothing's gonna ever hurt me. I'm strong, young, but it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. I mean,
well, they think 50 is like ancient. Being 50 is like really, really, really old.
I remember when I was in my 20s, I look at a guy like 50, like, whoa, this guy's a really old guy.
Right.
I mean, but
they're going to be surprised how fast it goes.
Yeah, I mean, so the coach, he should have listened to that coach. He was giving him good advice. So again, remember we always have to think about a guy like Dallas McCarver. Who's almost the same age. The guy was doing great. There's another guy I mentioned in the video. I when I saw him pose, I mean, I saw those gigantic calves he had and everything.
Yeah.
I made a flat statement. I said, this guy is a future Mr. Olympia. He's got everything. I was very impressed with the guy. Less than a year later, first he passes out on stage in a contest. Right after that, he dies.
Yeah.
I mean, so, he was a young guy too. Also probably thought he had the immortality that he could take all this crap and live forever. You can't, like they say, the old cliche, you can't fool Mother Nature.
No.
It's going to catch up with you.
Yeah.
So again, again, I really don't want anyone to get sick. I'm not hoping this.
No, none of us are. No.
But it's like I say to you, John, I almost dread going on Facebook because almost every week there's somebody dying who I knew, even if, like, whether it's Marvin Eder, who I didn't know directly, but I'd seen, I knew about. He was an older man. That's different. I mean, but even the younger guys, you still hear stories. I mean, even some of the female, there was a female bodybuilder died at 27 years old.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, come on, what's going on here?
I know.
That's not normal.
Yeah.
I mean, so.
Well, I mean, Marvin making it to 90, that's incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah, he made it to 90. And I don't see that happening with the guys today.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't care. I don't know. I mean, that old story about how they asked the Olympic athletes if you could win an Olympic gold medal.
Yeah.
They said, yeah, it's okay. We'll die the next day. I mean, what do you do with that type of thinking? I mean, you can't really, all you can do is shrug. I mean,
I know.
That's what they want. Fine. I mean,
they're going to pay the price.
I mean, to me, bodybuilding is great. You're winning titles, but this should be a life after bodybuilding.
Yeah.
You want to live healthy, and if you have,
and it should contribute to your life.
Yeah, it should contribute to
your life. The lifestyle should contribute to your life.
Right. You should have kids and stuff. I mean, a lot of people. I see stuff on the web about bodybuilding is unhealthy. I mean, I did a video. Somebody wrote underneath one of my videos, bodybuilding is a very unhealthy activity. I don't agree with that.
No, I don't either.
That's BS. I mean, I'm going by medical science, and the medical science says that weight training is one of the best things you could do.
Yeah.
Because as you get older, if you don't do resistant exercise, inevitably you're going to lose a lot of lean mass, and a loss of muscle is now known to be directly related to increased mortality.
Right.
So if done properly, if you follow a good nutritional program, you don't need a lot of garbage, and you do weight training, moderate weight training. You don't try and lift like giant weights when you're 60 years old. It's one of the best things you could do. Yeah. Bodybuilding itself is not inherently dangerous or unhealthy. It's the side things that they do, the drug use, overtraining, lifting too heavy. That's the kind of stuff that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Jerry. I wanted to ask your opinion on that too, because I just posted a video of me doing, I worked out last night I still do those T-bar rows, and I had 5 plates on there, which is kind of heavy, but I was doing it like 8 times in control. I wasn't jerking it up or anything, and I posted it, and every time I do that, it's like, you're going too heavy. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt your back. You're going to destroy. One guy said, you're going to grind your joints down to powder.
If you're using good form, you're not heaving the weight around.
Right.
And, you don't feel like it's excessively straining your muscles. If you don't, for example, after the workout, if you don't have like a pain in your shoulders and lower back, then it's fine. In other words, your body can still handle the weight. Now, there might come a time in the next couple of years where you might have to reduce the weight because, and it's not quite, it's more related, it's not necessarily the muscles, the connective tissue starts to dry out where it limits the amount. This is what happened with me. It limits the amount of weight you could use, but you'll know it. I mean, you'll feel it. But as long as you're doing it in good form and not having any excessive pain, and you're recovering between workouts, it's okay. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you.
Yeah. Yeah. I go pretty heavy, with legs and back, but I'm trying to control the weight more. I control it even on the way up and the way down.
Yeah.
And, I remember when I was in my 40s, I was training with a younger guy who was about 10 years younger than me, and we were both natural bodybuilders. And when I was in those natural bodybuilding shows, the way I got big in the off season was I would train really heavy, as heavy as I could go for 6 to 8 reps. And I remember we were deadlifting 500 pounds, and we were doing presses behind the neck with like 225. And I ended up there was like a couple of years there. It was right around the time I turned 40. I was getting hurt all the time, like every week. I was straining my back, deadlifting heavy or bent over rows or heavy squats. And I knew what it was from. It was from going way too heavy. And finally I said, okay, enough. I'm getting hurt all the time. This is not fun anymore. I don't want to be in pain all the time. So I cut back a little bit. I didn't go as heavy. I was still going heavy, but not as heavy. But like you said, you're going to know when the time is to reduce the weight,
Well, there's one thing there's a way around that. If you really want to train really super heavy, you could do what they call a periodization system, where you keep the heavy weights to about 3 months at a time.
I do that now. Yeah, I do
You know what I
that.
mean? In other words,
Yeah.
train as heavy as you want. Don't worry about it. Then the next three or 4 months, you do, let's say you lighten the weight a little bit. You don't use lightweight, use moderate weight. Well, let's say
Yeah.
8 to 12 reps per set, good form. And then if you want, let's say you want to get in top shape or you want to plan to go on a diet where lifting weights is harder to do, that would be your final, let's say, cycle where you now just use almost like moderate to light weights.
Yeah.
And do, let's say 8 to 15 reps per set, even up to 20. And this training in that manner, the whole idea of the periodization system, it was developed to take the strain off the joints from lifting heavy weights. So that was the whole reason it was developed. Because
Yeah.
they've known for years that if you train heavy all year round, there's an increased danger of injuries all year. Like I said, this is what happened to Dorian, Yates, and Mike Mentzer.
Yeah.
So if you do it that way, you could lift heavy weights.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of size. It's true. And now 3 months, and then the moderate you're not going to lose size. You
Right.
might gain more size.
Right.
That'll maintain the muscle size. And then when you slip into lighter, now you could go for higher reps, more muscle definition. And if you still want to keep even more size, you might even try doing that thing I said where you do like 20 to 30 reps to failure.
Yeah.
That will be surprising. Will actually maybe even push the size up even a little. It's not a bad system if for somebody who wants to train heavy.
Yeah. I do that now. I do cycle. I go like 7-week cycles, and
Yeah.
one's heavier than the moderate, and then and then like you could even go like train faster too when you get to the lighter weights.
That's right. That's another thing. Yeah, you could
Take less rest time, and then the weights feel heavier.
Right. See, because with the heavy weights, what the scientific studies show, if you want to increase strength, you got to rest a minimal of 2 minutes. And for the really heavy stuff like rows and squats, in 3 to up to 4 minutes between sets. And the reason is when you lift heavy like that, you're literally burning out your energy stores in the muscle that cause the muscle to contract. I'm talking about ATP, creatine phosphate, and it takes after a heavy set, it takes at least 3 to 4 minutes to completely put them back. The body will recycle, but it takes time. See. Now that's if you do that, you'll have maximum strength for the next set. Now you can see it's not a great concern when you're lifting lighter because your size thing it's not your major goal. So you could cut down the rest. Like the way I train, I'll be honest with you, I take too little rest because I always get to the gym late and it closes. I got to run like a madman. I do like one big set. I literally rest no more than 20 seconds between each set. And I got to tell you, it destroys my strength. I don't make any strength gains because of that. And I know why. You know what I mean? You can't make strength gain, but I have no choice. If I don't train like that, I don't finish the workout.
But it's good. It's good cardiovascular though.
But I'll tell you a funny thing. Sometimes I try to not to talk during the workout, but sometimes somebody comes, I'll talk a little bit, and I'll wind up resting. Let's say up to 3 minutes. I take the weight, and now suddenly I'm super strong on the second set.
Right.
I allow my muscle to recover.
Right.
You can actually see the difference,
Yeah. All right, Gerald. Let's go into 1991 and do our review of this year from 30 years ago.
Right.
So the first show I want to talk about was the second annual IronMan Invitational, and the first one was won by Sean Ray in 1990.
Right.
And that was a really good show. I was actually there in California that year and saw that, but I didn't see 91. So 91, JJ Marsh was the winner, and JJ was a great bodybuilder, great physique.
Yes.
And I think he had taken 5th the year before when Sean Ray won it. So he came back and he won. And Renell Janvier, remember Renell Janvier? He was in second.
I knew him well. He was the Renell. As a matter of fact, when I covered the World Championship, I think it was in Australia that year. I think 89, if I remember correctly. I might have the year wrong. It was held in what do they call that? The Gold Coast. I can't remember the name. Anyway, it was held in Australia. He was on the American team, and he trained at Golds.
Yeah.
So I always knew him. He was a quiet guy, but always in great shape. And the thing that stands out about Renell, he's the very first bodybuilder I've ever seen who had ripped glutes.
Yeah.
Shredded.
Really ripped glutes.
You have to understand, John, no male bodybuilder had the shredding. Rich Gaspari followed him, but he was the first. He was showing it in the mid 80s. So when he would pose at a contest, when he would, he had a nice physique, cut, don't get me wrong, great abs.
Yeah.
And he looked good. But when he turned to the back, you could hear the audience go, oh, you know, they like,
Yeah.
you see those ripped up glutes. Nobody had ever seen that.
Yeah.
And people would freak out because they'd never seen that before.
Right. Right.
I mean, today you see women with ripped glutes, which is
Right.
amazing. That to me is biologically amazing because women's the way the fat is stored in the glutes is different than it's really hard. Any woman will attest it's very hard for women to lose fat in the glutes and the hips and the upper thighs. And for a woman to have ripped glutes is just,
Yeah.
honestly, I hate to say this, I don't think it's naturally possible.
No, I don't either.
I'll leave it at that. In other words, I don't think it's naturally possible for women to get ripped glutes. They got to be two, but let's leave it at that. You know.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So go ahead and continue.
So Andreas Munzer was in third place.
Oh yeah, Andreas.
Thierry Pastel was fourth, and Vince Taylor was fifth.
Wow, Vince Taylor was fifth.
Yeah.
Did I tell you the story about when I first met Vince Taylor? I don't know if I told you. It was actually in Germany.
Germany, okay, with John Brown.
Yeah, he was. John Brown had apparently got him into bodybuilding or something, but he wasn't competing. He was at the contest, and you know, I just started talking to him, and we were talking about John Brown, who we both knew, and he said to, and I was with a guy named Julian Schmidt, who was also a writer for Weider at Flex.
Oh yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
He used to wear cowboy hats and stuff.
Yeah.
And so you know, he happened to have pictures with him. You know, Vince had pictures, 8x10s, and I looked at him and I was shocked how good I said, Mike, you know, I saw he had huge calves.
Yeah.
He says, why aren't you competing? I said, you have a pro physique. And I remember him say, I'll never forget. He said to me and Jill, he says, you know what? I don't think I'm good enough to be a pro. I can't stand on stage with these guys. That's what he said. And as history unfolds, you see, did he hold the record for competing in the most?
Yeah, he won more pro shows at one time than anyone else. Yeah.
He wound up being a top pro, but I'll never forget those words. He had no confidence in himself at all at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the guy was tremendous, you know.
Yeah.
He's still in great shape, and he's in his mid-50s.
Oh, I know. He's unbelievable. 60s. Yeah, he's in his 60s.
He's in 60s.
Yeah.
Still in great shape, you know. But who was the other guys that you mentioned? There was
Andreas Munzer.
Oh yeah, Munzer.
Third place.
Yeah, Munzer. Yeah, Mr. Ripped. Yeah.
And let me see who else. Thierry Pastel, great bodybuilder. He was in fourth.
I thought Terry Pastel, honestly, I mean, they run this tape at Gold's Gym on this big screen, you know, that's in a loop. It runs over. It's one of the Mr. Olympias that Terry Pastel competed in. And every time I look at it, I'm thinking, this guy was so underrated, man.
Oh, totally underrated. Yeah, I agree.
Short. He was what, 5'5", 5'6". He wasn't tall.
Probably 5'5", yeah.
You look at this guy. Geez, he had like almost like his mentor was Serge Nubret.
Right.
And the thing is that he had like everything Serge Nubret had, but even better arms.
Oh, way better. His arms were gigantic.
I mean, when he did the arm shot, it was startling. I mean,
I know.
Even looking at this video, go do a Google search for photos of Terry Pastel. Look at his arms and see if I'm exaggerating. His arms, and he had these thick abs, and he had that thing I always talk about, how it amazes me, because usually when you have a guy with thick abs, they have a wider waist.
Right.
Just like his mentor, Serge Nubret, they both had thick abs and a small waist.
Right.
Steve Reeves, the great Steve Reeves, used to make a statement. They asked him if he did abdominal work. He said no, because he's felt that when he built his abdominals, Steve Reeves is all into having a very tiny waist.
Right.
So he felt that doing any abdominal work would widen his waist, so he didn't do it.
Yeah.
So you know, these guys disproved him wrong. Of course, a lot of it's genetic, but they had great abs and a tiny waist.
Well, Thierry's abs were so deep. You look at you put your fingers on. Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, they couldn't have been better. I mean, plus he had a good back. He had good legs. I mean,
his legs were huge too.
I don't understand why. Maybe because of the height.
I don't either.
To me, this guy should have been Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, they always placed him low all the time.
Yeah.
Especially at the Mr. Olympia, he wouldn't even make top 10.
Did I tell you the funny story about when Serge Nubret got mad at me? I had to do it Terry Pastel.
No.
Okay. I was writing for Weider, and I was scheduled to meet Terry Pastel at Gold's Gym to interview him, but Terry only spoke French. So the interpreter was going to be none other than Serge Nubret himself. Okay, so I get to the gym, but unfortunately I was something like 7 minutes late, right? And Sergeant Bray was in the on the side of the gym, the area, where it's like a couple of tables and chairs there. Sergeant Bray, a lot of people don't know this. He had a hair-triggered temper. He had a very bad temper. Now, I knew Sergeant Bray previously, so Sergeant Bray immediately starts yelling at me. Why are you late? This and that. Blah, 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 blah. He goes, and I'm not saying, I'm just looking at him. He goes on for about 7 minutes yelling at me about how unprofessional I am and this and that. And so I listen to him. I don't say anything. I look at him. I said, I apologize, Serge. You're right. I should have been on time. By the way, where's Terry? He says he's not here yet. Terry showed up a half hour late. I didn't make an issue of it though. I always remember that story, Sergeant Bray, he calmed down and he was friendly after that. He never held a grudge, or he was, the whole thing was forgotten 5 minutes later, I don't remember what the interview was about. It was so long ago.
Yeah.
I might have got his arm training. I don't remember, but he was a nice guy, Terry. He was a very nice guy. He's another guy that, as far as I know, he's still in good shape too.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah. He's in good shape.
It's 30 years ago that he was competing, so that was a long time ago.
It's a shame that he just was overlooked so badly.
Yeah, it really was.
Terrible,
Now the Arnold Classic, I think, took place a week or 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is Vince Taylor. I remember him in that IronMan. It seemed like he was way off. He was holding water, and I remember he even had like a little gyno.
Oh yeah.
At the IronMan. So 2 weeks later, he really tightened up a lot, and he went from 5th place at the Ironman to 3rd place at the Arnold Classic, which is a tougher show.
Right.
But Sean Ray, who was suspended the year before because he won it in 1990, and then they caught him. They failed the drug test. They had to give back the money. I think it was $60,000 and the trophy. And so he came back and got redemption 1 year later, and he won, I think, pretty easily.
Yeah.
Sean won that contest very easily because Vince was off. So Vince was in 3rd, and Renell Janvier was in 2nd again.
Yeah.
JJ Marsh, who just won the Ironman, dropped down to 4th.
Oh.
And Thierry Pastel was 5th again.
Right. In that 90, if I remember correctly, when they took away the title, it was after the contest.
It was after the contest, yeah, because they did the drug testing.
Mike Ashley, who was 2nd, Mike Ashley was as the 1990 Arnold winner.
Right.
I remember Sean Ray, for some reason, didn't want to return the trophy. I don't remember the reasoning why, but I remember there was a little controversy about that. He eventually returned it. Of course, he was back in good grace, and as you say, he won it that year in 91.
Yeah.
He came back and redeemed himself, so to speak.
Yeah. So really, Sean Ray could have been a 2-time winner if they wouldn't have done the testing, but they did.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was Steve Brisbois, who we talked about before, the little guy from Canada. He was in 6th, so he did really well.
Yeah.
And Rich Gaspari, who won the first Arnold Classic 2 years ago in 1989, was dropped down to 7th.
Wow.
So that was probably the beginning of the end for Rich Gaspari, because he had taken 5th at the Olympia the year before.
Right.
And he had taken 4th the year before that.
Right.
And so now he was down to 7th. And then when he went to the Olympia that year in 1991, he was 10th. So I think that was pretty much the end of his career.
Yeah, that was it.
And Robbie was 8th. So Robbie was probably off.
Yeah. Right.
And Mohammed Benaziza was really off. He took 11th.
Wow. Well, that's unusual for Mohammed Benaziza.
Yeah.
Another guy who was fantastic. Jeez.
And Bob Paris was 16th.
16th.
Yeah.
That's do not place, isn't it? I mean, really.
Yeah. Ron Love was 14th.
Ron Love. Yeah.
These guys were a couple of these guys were really out of shape, but
yeah,
that was only the 3rd annual Arnold Classic, because that was the only 3rd one. They started in 1989. So
right. Yeah. I'm not sure what happened to those guys, why they entered in they probably were holding water or something like that.
Yeah.
Some of these guys, I mean, unless they were like in ripped shape, they didn't look good. I mean, they didn't. We could see that they weren't going to do well.
Right.
Had to, guys like Ron Love and the other guys. I mean, they had to be ripped, or they just wouldn't place well.
Yeah.
They had to be in really good shape, maximum shape.
Yeah. Another show I wanted to mention was this was in the spring. This was after the Arnold Classic. It was the Niagara Falls Pro Invitational.
Yeah.
And they used to hold that show every year back then. And Albert Beckles won. I think that was probably the last show Albert Beckles won.
Is that right? 91.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he was 94 at that show.
How old was he really? Let's see. Because he was born, his real birthday was 38, right? 1938.
He's 10 years younger than what he claims, whatever he claims.
Yeah.
He's not, I think he claims 91 now, so he's 81.
So I think he was 53 for sure, like actual 53.
Well, you know what though?
That's amazing.
I mean, when you think about it, that's tremendously impressive.
That's amazing. Yeah,
I mean,
that's got to be the record, right? I mean, nobody else was that age.
I mean, I don't know why he exaggerates his age, but the point is he's beating bodybuilders half his age. He's 53.
53. Yeah.
53. Most guys are done. I mean, forget about being a pro show. I mean, to do that is a tremendous accomplishment. You got to give the guy credit, you know.
Pretty sure that was his last win. But that's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Sonny Schmidt was second, and Tom Terwilliger was third.
Yeah, Tom Terwilliger. Yeah, nice guy, Tom. Yeah.
Tom always talks about that contest every time I have him on because Tom was a great poser.
Yes, he was.
And he said Albert beat him in the posing round.
And he can't figure that out?
He didn't think Albert should have beat him in the posing round. Because remember how Albert used to do that dance?
Yeah,
he used to hit a pose and then he would dance. He would like do the shuffle, the Albert Beckles shuffle.
Yeah.
So
well, the same thing happened if you remember at the 90 Olympia when Lee Haney beat Lee Labrada in the posing.
Yeah, right.
Lee Labrada, who almost anyone will agree with, was one of the greatest posers in bodybuilding history.
Right.
Watching him was like a ballet. I mean, the guy was unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, and no offense to Lee, but Lee just didn't flow in his posing like Lee Labrada did.
Not like Lee Labrada, no.
And you might remember the story I told you when I asked the judges how they could possibly have Lee Haney beat Labrada in posing. They said, well, no, posing doesn't mean the routine. It means how well you present yourself, which to this day, I don't understand that at all.
No, that's fudging with the interpretation, right?
That I call that a politician's answer, which is
right.
Not an answer, you know.
Right.
You know, so.
Well, let's talk about the other big show that spring. That was the Night of the Champions, and this was Dorian Yates' first IFBB Pro victory.
Right.
So Dorian had taken second the year before to Mohammed Benaziza.
Yeah.
And now he came back and he really improved a lot. You know, remember then when Dorian was just starting his IFBB Pro career, he was making significant improvements every year. It was unbelievable.
That's true.
And back then, Jerry, Dorian really had a real symmetrical physique. He was known as a mass monster, like we were talking about, but he had a very small waist.
Right.
When that front lat spread, even the front double bicep, incredible, great aesthetics, great shape. Right. Really ripped and in great condition. He had an amazing physique that year.
I think the change in Dorian occurred somewhere around the mid 90s.
Yeah.
I think it's when he started using
93. That's when he got really big.
That's when he started using the insulin GH steroid combo.
Yeah.
And it made him very big, but it produced that look we were talking about earlier. That kind of like monstrous look. And towards the end, he even started to get a bloated stomach, which was really usual, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, because he didn't, as you point out, he didn't have that at all in 91. He was very hard shaped, ripped, you know.
He didn't have the torn bicep at that time, so he was very, very symmetrical and, you know, really great physique.
At that contest, I believe, I asked him, let me think, 91, I think it was 91. I interviewed him and I said, what's your goal, Dorian? He told me he wanted to be the Olympia winner of the 90s, meaning he wanted to win the Olympia through the 90s and then retire. And, you know, it turns out he was right. That's exactly what he did, you know. His prediction came true. He said he was going to win every year until for maybe 6 years in a row and then quit.
Yeah.
He told me that.
I think this was the contest that really established him, where everybody was talking about him, you know, because I interviewed Vince Taylor. And Vince said when they got to the Olympia that year, everybody was talking about Dorian. They thought Dorian was going to upset Lee Haney.
Oh, you mean in 90?
In 91, yeah.
Yeah, and 91.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, as a matter of fact, I remember. Let me think. Yeah, it was 91. That's when I was walking around. I think I told you I was walking around the lobby, and one of the IFBB officials came up to me, and he said, "Jerry, there's going to be, because remember Lee Haney had won it every year,
Yeah.
and for several years. And this is what his 8th Mr. Olympia, right?
Yeah, his 8th one. Yeah.
And this guy says to me, "There's going to be a new Mr. Olympia crowned tonight." This was after the prejudging.
Yeah.
I said to him, "Senovich, are you saying that Lee lost?" He said, "I'm not saying anything." He said, "I'm just telling you, don't be surprised if there's a new Mr. Olympia crowned tonight."
Yeah.
And so I said, "It has to be Dorian Yates."
Yeah. I think Dorian beat Lee in the mandatory poses in the muscle.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I was sitting. This was in Orlando, Florida, if I remember correctly. This contest.
Right.
And I remember sitting in the press section right next to the late, remember Don Ross,
Yeah.
writer, and we were watching the comparisons, and from the front, Dorian stood like he was right there with Lee. I mean, Lee had certain things on him. Lee had thicker pecs.
Yeah.
I felt that maybe the arms were about the same, but Dorian was maybe a little bit harder in the midsection. This a little harder look overall. And I said to Don, I said, "Gee, this is a tough one to pick, Don." I said, "Lee's great. He's in fantastic shape, but look at this guy, Dorian. I mean, he's peaked to the gills. I mean, he can't be any better than he is."
Yeah.
But that says, "Wait, let's see what happens when they turn to the back." So they did the back, and that's when Don and I both looked at each other's side. Says, that's when we knew that Haney won. But it's not that Dorian didn't have a great back, but Lee's back was in fantastic shape that year. It was wide, thick, and you could just see, if you look at the photos, Lee edged him out on the back. I believe that Lee won the contest on the basis of slightly having a better back than Dorian that year. In subsequent years, Dorian's back improved.
Yeah, it was much better.
The contest was held like 3 years later. Let's say, then Dorian would have won.
Yeah.
Because Dorian's back had improved so much in that 2 or 3 year period that he had the thickness and everything increased.
Yeah.
He would have beaten Lee. He would have
Right.
beaten Lee. Yeah. But that year, Lee beat him on the back, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lee had a smaller waist too, so from the front.
Yeah, that's another thing. He definitely had a smaller waist.
Yeah.
Although, there's no question who had the better calves. That was definitely Dorian.
Yeah.
He had those just freaky calves,
And great hamstrings too. I remember that was the thing that with Dorian, when he turned to the back, he not only had the back muscles, but he also had, his glutes were really hard. He had incredible hamstrings, and he had those huge calves. So it was the whole picture,
Yeah, I know. When he turned to the back, it was like all over for everybody.
All over, yeah, for everybody.
And when in subsequent years, when Dorian competed, as long as I covered the Olympia, I went through most of those years. It was when you get to the contest, it was always the discussion was who would play second.
Yeah.
It was like a foregone conclusion that Yates would win. Everyone was trying to figure out who would get second, third, and fourth. Nobody even considered that anyone would beat Yates. He was that dominant.
I know. Yeah.
Of course, this happened later on with Ronnie Coleman.
With Ronnie Coleman too, right? Yeah.
Big deal,
So at that night of the champions, Sonny Schmidt was a really good bodybuilder from Australia. He was in second place.
Yeah.
Sonny died at a pretty young age, but he died of lung cancer, right? Because he used to smoke.
Yeah, he died in 2004, I believe. But unfortunately, he had an unfortunate incident happen in 2000. He got involved with this big cocaine dealer in Australia, and he got caught transporting cocaine with this dealer, and he did 3 years in prison.
Wow.
Now, Sonny Schmidt was an interesting guy. He had a great physique, as you know, but I consider him, if you said to me, who is the #1 toughest interview you ever did in bodybuilding, it was Sonny Schmidt, mainly because I almost felt there should have been English subtitles when I was in it. Because honestly, it's not that the guy was a bad guy. He was a nice guy, but I just didn't understand a word he was saying. I said, so what is your back routine? That's the way I just couldn't make out what he was saying.
Wow.
And this is one of the only times, I think it was the only time when I interviewed a bodybuilder when I just couldn't write the article because I I took notes, but it didn't. I didn't have enough to write an article.
Yeah.
I couldn't write it. I mean, it felt bad, but I mean, I just couldn't make out what he was saying. He was good friends with Milos Sarcev, was one of his best friends. If I was using my head, Milos was in the vicinity. I should have called over Milos to translate. I don't know. I wasn't trying to insult Sonny. I just couldn't make out what he was saying. And Milos could have translated, and I could have written the article, but I didn't. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
So I shook his hand after a half hour. I said, "Thanks a lot, Sonny. We'll do." I knew it wouldn't go. I knew it. But he was a great bodybuilder. But
Yeah, he had really good leg development. I remember.
I remember he did tell me something in that interview that I still do remember. He told me he had he was from Samoa. He had several brothers, and he said his brother. I laugh when I get a picture of them. He said his brothers were all over 400 pounds. He called himself the runt of the family.
Yeah, wow.
That's what he called himself. I'm getting a mental image of these giant, because Samoans,
They're huge. Yeah.
They think of these big fat guys, a lot of them,
Yeah.
So he just was a genetic anomaly. He was a smaller guy who wound up being a great bodybuilder.
Yeah.
He went 360 degrees from his brothers.
Those guys have such unbelievable genetics for size and strength.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's a guy at our gym. He's in the medical industry, and he comes in with his scrubs on all the time. And you could tell just when he walks, he's a big guy,
Yeah.
And he's not a bodybuilder. He never competes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll see him training in a t-shirt. I swear to God, Jerry, he's got at least 22-inch arms, at least.
And he's muscular? He's muscular too?
Yeah. He's not ripped, but he's muscular. He's not fat. He's not like a fat Samoan.
Right.
I told my training partner, I said, I want to tape that guy's arms one day. His arms look like they're at least 22, 23 inches. His triceps are so big.
Yeah.
And I remember he was benching once by himself. There was no partner or nothing. He had 4 plates on there. He's doing like nothing.
Wow.
And he doesn't even go that heavy, and he doesn't train hard.
Yeah.
Because he's not competing or anything. He's just naturally huge. If this guy ever competed, he would blow people away.
Reminds me of the story Sergio Oliva once told. I don't know if you ever heard this one. Sergio claimed he was from a family of, I think, 19 or 20 children.
Jeez.
Yeah, he had 20 children in his family. But he used to tell a story of he said his name was Diego. He said he had an older brother in Cuba that made him look like a pipsqueak.
Oh God,
that made him look tiny.
that's unbelievable.
That he says he had all of my, the small waist, everything, but he was like twice as big as me. And I tried to picture this, and it almost scared me.
Yeah, right.
To think of a guy, Sergio Oliva, a gigantic version of him was scary to me.
Can you imagine if he had the small waist too?
Right, he said he had he said he had everything I had, but twice as big, right? He said he was even smaller, So when I met his son, Sergio Oliva Jr., this was in my mind for years, because I never saw a picture of this alleged version. So I said to Sergio Jr., one of the first conversations I had, I said, tell me, I got to ask you something. Your father said that he had a brother in Cuba that was much bigger and more muscular than him. Is that true? So Sergio Jr. said, well, if it's true, he never told me about it. I never heard it.
Yeah.
He said, you never saw any photos of his family? But he says, I never saw anybody that fits that description.
Yeah. He had a son kind of late in life. So
yeah. So
I remember it was in '84 when he was in the Olympia last time, or one of the last times. Remember, that's when he held him up on stage.
Held the baby. Yeah, that was Sergio Jr. And didn't he say he was something like a future Mr. Olympia or something like that?
Yeah, he said he's holding in his hands the future myth or something.
That's it. He is Mr. Olympia. Right on, Sarge. Ladies and gentlemen, please. No matter what, I win them all, lose one, it doesn't mean anything. This, what I have in my hand, it is 9 pound, 14 ounce, a baby boy, perhaps the next myth.
The future myth, yeah. Of course, Sergio, it turns out that Sergio Sr. discouraged Sergio Jr.
Right.
Because Sergio Sr. always felt that he got bad breaks from Weider and all that. He didn't want his son to go through that. He was trying to spare him the pain, so to speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another story.